perfect. We've got 2 minutes before you start, Gerard. So
I'll stick around until then. Thank you.
yeah.
Okay, ding dong, but it's not King Kong.
Exactly, Gerard. I'll leave it to you to introduce the presentation.
Thank you, Mike. Colleagues, I've seen a number of faces on the participant list, friends, ex-colleagues and peers. Thank you for the opportunity. The topic of this round and the subgroupings are particularly poignant to the Northwest University, with specific reference to the education model that we are now pursuing. And let me just state this emphatically. The model was introduced to management at some stage, and there's some buy-in, and then there is some realization that we cannot turn around, and so forth. The short and the sweet of it is what you see is a combination of quite a number of years of thinking and experimentation, and it stems from the days of the flexible learning way of thinking and the telematic way of thinking. I think we've come a very long way subsequently, but COVID has now reintroduced many of the concepts that several institutions have been experimenting with and were way ahead of their time, even passing the entities that are supposed to operate at such a level with such masses of students. This was just brought to the fore. It resurfaced, and what you're going to see is not a rehash, it's a culmination of many years of experience in the face-to-face, paper-based distance education, telematic era, blended learning or flexible era, telematic era, blended learning era, and then with the introduction, unfortunately, of COVID and the lockdown, the fact that the universities internationally were forced to clamp down, to scale down, and to keep their heads low and sustain teaching and learning. So I'm going to quickly look at a few mega trends, international trends, lessons that we learned during emergency remote teaching and learning, a few emerging practices that became quite obvious, and then the reality of a shifting landscape that was enforced on us by COVID. And then I'll end up with a proposed model. The magic or the mega trends that I would like to refer to was summarized by Stephen Bonk in 2016 already. And we've been experimenting with these variables within the context of blended learning. And now we all know that blended learning means anything to anybody, depending on how you pitch your program or your module, If you mix something, it's a blend, apparently. My take on blended was not from the online version with some contact. My take on blended learning is a true mix based on the outcomes of the module or the program and the extent to which what type of channel or medium would support the attainment of that. So it's a very strong learning foundation that I apply to the interpretation of blended learning. So if it takes a 35mm slide to support you, then we do that. If it takes a video, then we do that, etc., etc. If it takes a high-end multimedia with all the bells and whistles, fine, but then it comes at a premium. So the mega trends: learning engagement, pervasive access, which was the one that has been the Achilles of all institutions in South Africa, and then the customization of learning. I'd like to just quickly run through those. You can see there's an emphasis towards the more side of the continuum: more mobile, more visual, more touch-centered, more game-based, more immersive, more collaborative, etc. In terms of pervasive access, more online. With that comes the dilemma that I call the big five: technology access, internet access, signal access, access to power, etc., finances to fund all these, know-how. They're all clustered in what I call the big five. So more online, video-based. It's quite obvious that video is becoming quite prominent. It's more global, it's immediate, expert-based, synchronous, which is a pipe dream that we're all working towards. Open, free, informal, and ubiquitous access. Customization of learning. More blended, self-directed. I have an issue with the phrase self-directed, because I do not think you can leave students at their own peril, because it's going to be to their peril. You need to guide them. So it's a guided self-study or a directed self-study. You need to structure their formal and their informal, and whatever they then evolve into will become a self-directed continuous learner. A lot of competency-based, on-demand learner, massive, modular, modifiable, flipped, personal. The word flip has also developed a new meaning at the Northwest University in terms of the model. A couple of international trends. We've seen the shift from blended learning to what is called hybrid learning. We've seen the emphasis on student success, a lot of challenges. NWU, for one, has realized that they are not in touch with their students in terms of data, and we have gone through a rapid learning curve to sort that out. Complex technology and architecture and data as in information, data towards information. There's a very strong emphasis on that. The fact that student profiles were pushed to the center of the focal point, it became the focal point, was something that we also grappled with, because it affects learning design in total, and the way in which you prepare your digital study materials, if ever you go digital. We've also been slapped from the side by new forms of assessment being required, and then the assumption that the student voice should be heard in terms of whatever we do during this episode. Lessons learned during emergency remote teaching and learning. We soon became very clear about the fact that face-to-face is not emergency remote teaching and learning, is not remote teaching and learning, and is absolutely not online. You can't use the one design and push it through and deliver it on any of these other categories, because it's going to fail dismally. Flexible migration between remote and face-to-face. This is something that we've learned. You need to be agile, because the students are now coming back to campus with all the assumed return to normal undertones, which we all know is not going to happen. The widening of the digital divide was a very clear lesson. we have students that live in areas without power. They live in dwellings that are completely unconducive to learning. It's noisy, it's drafty, it's just impossible to survive. Basic student data information crisis, I've already referred to that. And I believe, colleagues, you've experienced exactly the same in terms of third-party service providers, the saviors of higher education coming to the forth, wanting to sell you each and every product around every corner at the best price, only wanting to make digital teaching and learning work. We were batting these offers like it was phase one cricket. What do you call that round where they force you to hit and they enclose a circle of field workers? We had that. We've seen the notional overload, and we've also experienced the learning environments. Mike, just help me on the time. I was so busy, I couldn't even see how long the session was.
You've got 6 minutes, Gerard. I'll call time at 2 minutes. Okay. Good,
thank you. So the reality of non-conducive learning environments was also a fait accompli, and we had to manage that, deal with it. We also realized that regardless of all the above, students engaged with those modules that were strongly technology-based and that were able to, were set up in such a way that they were able to be accessed. In terms of emerging practices, I'd like to highlight a few ones, the red ones. I think it's very clear that learning infrastructure, in terms of the technology, the internet provision, data, funding to have technology access as such, and the broad-based type of access required is a given. We try to manage this through the low strategy. We all know what that means: low expectancy, low data, low bandwidth, low everything. And there was always some form of adoption of hybrid learning models. There was a very clear emergence of the so-called high-flex learning design, and this is the direction that Northwest will be going into. High-flex, so you can you should design a program, the teaching and learning delivery, the assessment, and the support in order to align with the high-flex notion, even the physical venues to align with this. A very strong emphasis on digital content. If the lecturers did not provide it, if we could not provide it as a support center, students gained access to it somehow. Digital textbooks, very strong. Capacity of support structures were pressured immensely, and we realized that whatever setup you have at your institution was to support face-to-face, paper-based distance, or a blend of some sorts, and suddenly comes online and it's not, the capacity is severely restricted to assist there. Future of hybrid work and learning, it's a question of looking at learning from a holistic perspective, and prioritizing a lot of those who need to contribute. And there's a very strong sense of institutional transformation, and not only teaching and learning transformation. Because you cannot, if your HR department does not realize, if the finances department does not realize that this new form of teaching and learning will require more funds, will require more staff, will require more investment, and then all the other support services that are linked to that, we're going to miss the point. So we soon realized that the institution's ability to respond needs to improve dramatically, because we're not going to survive by reacting to a crisis. We need to innovate. And we are now at the pivotal point. We are now back on campus comes January, and then we should have been ready, and we are still grappling with all the sub-elements of readiness. And what we find was that lecturers tend to take the lead, and they adopt all forms of technologies, and IT and the CTL alike need to mop up after the fact. a huge crisis because we cannot support everything. We cannot be all to everyone. I'm just going to refer.
Sorry, Gerard, 2 minutes.
Okay, so this dynamic, you might have come across it. It's a Gartner figure, and I'm not going to delve into the detail. What I want to do is skip a few slides and focus on two drivers. One has to do with the learning foundation that we approached or adopted as the main set of drivers, and they run on a continuum, 3 of them in a cube form, and they affect the facades of the cube from within. It has to do with the learning infrastructure. It has to do with the type of learning, whether it's guided or not, and it has to do with where the learning should take place. That is from a student perspective. To the right, you see the response of institutions. They usually, this is how we approached it in the past. We said, okay, we must get in place synchronous and asynchronous and high-tech and low-tech and sticky campuses and remote learning. But the point is, that is the wrong way. We need to look at it from within and from the learning perspective. So overlaying these two on top of each other introduces the high-flex teaching and learning model of the university. So at this stage, we are quite challenged in terms of what is known as the sticky campus, the changes that need to take place on campus in terms of teaching and learning, physical infrastructure, etc. Because we've sort of mastered the remote type of setting, but we could not deal with the learning infrastructure on the student side because we don't control that. So what do universities do? They step into the socioeconomic reality of students, supply them with funds to buy data, or give them data bundles, give them technology, requiring them to return it, etc. And they now they step in the socioeconomic sphere again and take them out of their learning infrastructure restricted settings and bring them to campus. So we're going to have a remote impact, a remote model, regardless of whether the students are on campus. This is how things are going to pan out. I see this happening. It's already unfolding. Yes.
Sorry, can I call time on you there?
Yes, this is the model, colleagues.
Okay.
Are there any questions?
If you've got questions, please place them in the chat, and Gerard can answer over there because we're pressed for time.